A series of well-coordinated incidents will be planned to take place in and around Guantanamo to give genuine appearance of being done by hostile Cuban forces. A. Incidents to establish a credible attack, not in chronological order. 1. Start rumors. Many.
Two North Africans, with Belgian passports and a letter of introduction from an Islamic group in London, persuaded Massoud to give them an interview. They began with some unexpected questions. Why are you against Osama bin Laden? Why do you call him a killer? Each exploded a bomb, one in the camera and the other in a suicide belt. Massoud was dead.
شاید من اولین نفراتی بودم در دنیا که از موضوع مطلع می شدم. پرسش مهم این که چرا احمد شاه مسعود این گونه ترور شده و چرا اصلا ترور شده در این مقطع، چه اتفاقی افتاده که دو نفر جان خودشون از دست دادن، دو نفر نیروی حرفه‌ای.
Iranian intelligence judged that only Al-Qaeda could have pulled off this complex hit. One obvious motive was to help their hosts, the Taliban. But it smelt of an international plot.
فکر می‌کردیم که آنچه که اتفاق افتاده پایان یک ماجرا نیست، آغاز یک ماجراست. و فکر می‌کردیم که اتفاقات بیشتری در پیشه.
Massoud's other ally also smelled a rat.
Мы с президентом Бушем говорили, и я в разговоре с ним упомянул о том, что на днях был убит лидер Северного альянса в Афганистане Масуд. И я сказал тогда американскому коллеге, знаешь, меня это очень тревожит, такое чувство, что что-то должно произойти. Они явно к чему-то готовятся.
The next day was the 11th of September, 2001.
Use clandestine radio.
And then above all, the centerpiece of 9/11, I think the single most important piece of evidence in the entire day, the incoming threat given to the Secret Service, Angel is next, meaning we will destroy Air Force One. And it doesn't just come with Angel is next, it then comes with a train of cosmic level code words, top secret code words, indicating that behind that threat is a network that has access to the most important secrets of a whole range of executive departments, presumably CIA, National Security Agency, Pentagon, FBI, Justice, Treasury even, the whole array.
More than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally. A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, the Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives.
A spokesman for the the Israeli embassy here in Washington issued a categorical denial, saying any suggestion that Israelis are spying in or on the U.S. is, quote, simply not true.
And that's a threat. The idea is, what they're saying to Bush is, you've got to go on television and start saying, bin Laden, bin Laden, bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, 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 and you will remain in office. If you don't, you may be liquidated at any time. You may not see the end of this day. I think to some degree, what's most interesting about 9/11 are the things that almost happened but didn't. What happened, of course, was a terrific tragedy, but the things that might have happened were even worse. The other thing the invisible government wanted Bush to do, this coup faction, if you will, was to get on the phone with Putin and tell him, we are seizing Afghanistan now, and we're going to set up bases in your soft underbelly in the former Soviet republics of Central Asia. Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzia for starters, after that perhaps Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and the rest. That is a very dangerous move. That might have been responded to by Putin with his own threats. He might have said no. So the invisible government had to have the possibility of nuclear escalation, and they did. They had it in two ways that we know of. One is that in the Angel is Next phone call, they had code words that seemed to indicate that they had access to the nuclear launch codes, that they were able to somehow access the so-called football, the collection, the briefcases that are filled with these codes that accompany the president but are also kept in other places for use in case of all-out nuclear war. So the perpetrators of 9/11, the coup faction inside the U.S. government, have these codes. They can launch nuclear war that way. There's another way they could have launched it, through an exercise called Global Guardian, because it just so happened that on the morning of 9/11, there was also an exercise simulating all-out thermonuclear war. And part of that exercise appears to have been an attempt, as a part of the drill, as a part of the simulation, for a rogue faction to gain access to command and control systems that would give them the ability to launch missiles. So that might be the concrete, specific backdoor that the invisible government might have used in order to escalate in the nuclear realm if that had become necessary. Essentially, the ultimatum to Bush is, either you launch the war of civilizations against the Arabs and the Islamic world in Afghanistan, later in Iraq, you launch it in conventional form, or we will launch it ourselves in nuclear form. In other words, we can incinerate Cairo, Damascus, Tehran, you name it, Kabul, all of those places can be hit by missiles within minutes. We'll do that and leave you to deal with the consequences. Now, of course, one of the overtones of this, and I'm relying here on, just in terms of the sources, the Réseau Voltaire, presumably having the benefit of the French intelligence services. Secondly, Debka, a website that is close, I believe, to the views of the Israeli Mossad. And then another one called Namakon, which is a group of KGB Soviet intelligence veterans. They seem to converge on this hypothesis that there was a nuclear option built into it. And essentially it's an ultimatum telling Bush that the only way you can remain in office is if you begin to preach the war of civilizations and and act in the way that we are demanding. There's also reports, through the Rachel Voltaire in particular, that Tony Blair was on the phone actively with Bush, telling him, you've got to go on television and say Al-Qaeda, bin Laden. And of course, for that, there was absolutely no proof. There was no scrap of proof in the world that bin Laden, Al-Qaeda had anything to do with this. And indeed, the FBI has admitted that in going into Afghanistan, they never found anything, not one line, not one scrap, that would have anything to do with the events of 9/11. Scratching the surface on 9/11, what is revealed is a horror that is much greater than even the one that we saw.
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Britt.
This going to the fact that they were spying on some Arabs, right?
Correct.
All right, Carl, thanks very much.
A 1999 FCC document indicates several government agencies expressed deep concerns that too many unauthorized, non-law enforcement personnel can access the wiretap system. And the FBI's own nondescript office in Chantilly, Virginia, that actually oversees the CALEA wiretapping program, is among the most agitated about the threat. But there is a bitter turf war internally at FBI. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia, that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years, they've thrown much of the business to Comverse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Comverse government contracts over the years now work for the company. Numerous sources say some of those individuals were asked to leave government service under what knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department.
And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place.